Hello, and welcome to another episode of Excerpts in the Americas, a video series that brings together thought leaders from countries and industries across our hemisphere for short, in-depth conversations on the most pressing issues of our time. I'm Wazamala, fellow and leader of the Caribbean Initiative here at the Atlantic Council. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Suriname's Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Business and International Cooperation, the Honorable Albert Ramdin, and for the purpose of this conversation, a candidate for the Secretary General position at the Organization of American States. Currently, Minister Ramdin, in his capacity of the Foreign Minister of Suriname, has helped strengthen relationships with the United States and its institutions, has helped to navigate the country's complex dynamics during a COVID-19 pandemic, during challenges of protectionism, and of course, the climate crisis. Previously, from 2005 to 2015, Minister Ramdin actually served as the Assistant Secretary General of the OAS, learning its institutional knowledge and structure, all of which he will share with us today. Minister Ramdin, it's great to have you here with us, and we're really excited for you to bring your thought leadership, something you're renowned for, across the democracy, human rights, climate resilience, and economic development. With that, we'll go ahead and get started.
Thank you very much, Wasim. My pleasure.
Would love to hear more about what your vision is for the OAS, especially over the next 5 years. If elected, what are going to be some of your priorities?
Well, thank you very much. And I think I want to start by repeating what you said earlier. I'm very committed to democracy, democratic governance, human rights, rule of law, but also a strong judicial system that is independent and very clear in its authority, but also engagement with institutions and organizations within our societies. The OAS is a political body, an hemispheric body with a long history, but over time things have changed. And I think engagement with society as a whole, that is NGOs, semi-government institutions, as well as the private sector, is critically important in this day and age. So that adjustment needs to be made. We need to introduce these institutions within the works of the OAS. In terms of my own priorities, because we live in very interesting times, very challenging times, and from my own perspective, I try to be always very optimistic, very positive towards the future. All these challenges which we face, we must find opportunities in that as well. And when we say opportunities, based on the assessment which we made, I think it's time for strengthening the OAS system. And that is not only the OAS, that's the Inter-American system, to work much more together. And for me, within the OAS, there are three critical issues which I want to address. The first one has to do with the organizational structure, the institutional arrangement. We have to become more effective. I must acknowledge immediately that we have great personnel working for the OAS, very committed, very dedicated, but I think they lost some kind of motivation. And it may have something to do with COVID-19 and the aftermath of that, but we have to go back on track and utilize the assets, the strength of the OAS Secretariat much more effectively. So that's a reform process of aligning ourselves again with the goals and objectives of the OAS. The second part of that institutional framework is our budget. We know it's a challenged budget. We know that member states cannot provide all the required resources to the OAS. We'll have to keep that in mind. And I think we need to bring back the relevance, the authority of the OAS as an inter-American institution to be able to deal with the many challenges which we face, whether that's migration, cross-border crime, whether that's security, democracy, elections, and so on. That's my first priority. And I think we can achieve that based on the report which was produced a couple of months ago by independent consultants. We can make good advances within 2-3 years on that, if not earlier. I know the institution from inside out, so I know where we need to plug in. The second one has to do with the objective of looking at the immediate issues which we face in the hemisphere, crisis situations, whether that's in terms of elections or security or migration or climate crisis, debt problems, but also issues like in certain countries like Haiti. The OAS has to play a meaningful role, a relevant, useful role in those crises. So the idea is, from my side, is that we develop roadmaps, how we deal with these issues. The idea is not to divide, the idea is to unite, to find a way forward. And for that, you need to exercise authority, but at the same time, utilize our inter-American system much more effectively. And I think we can do that by engaging former presidents, by engaging former secretaries general. There are more tools in the diplomatic basket which we can apply here. And I think we haven't done that. One thing I know for sure, we should not isolate ourselves from countries. We need to engage with them. We need to dialogue with them. So this is the second point. The third one will take some more time because that goes into issues of sustainability. Ultimately, what we want is a peaceful hemisphere, no wars, no conflicts. We don't want to also engage the global community and with that become entangled in a global geopolitical situation. We want to make sure that this hemisphere, our Western hemisphere, remains peaceful, free of wars, free of conflicts. Um, at the same time, we need to look at economic development because democracy is one thing, but in the end, the people want to see a better life, a more secured life, and with opportunities going forward. So for me, sustainable development means that we will need to engage countries on their needs, their priorities. And while we are not a development agency, we don't have the funds, but we do have institutional capacity within the Inter-American system, like PAHO, like IECA, like the Inter-American Development Bank, and other partners at the sub-regional level, development banks. We need to make sure that we have one agenda going forward that will develop economic capabilities, which will guarantee jobs, which will guarantee a steady income and a secure environment. If we can do that, and that's a much longer term prospect and project, this will not happen in 5 years. I'm realistic enough, but we have to start now. And that means supporting state institutions, supporting educational systems, collaboration much more on security between the countries at the sub-regional level. If we can do that, I'm sure that we're looking towards a prosperous hemisphere, and that's ultimately the goal of the OAS: peace and prosperity. So those are three objectives I have in a very high level fashion. I see there is enough appetite for that in my discussions with member states, and they see a future where the OAS can play a role without becoming a bystander with no role, but also not becoming a force that takes sides. An honest broker cannot take sides, and we don't want to be in that position.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you for outlining those priorities. I think what I'm seeing is, you're looking at the institution itself on how to make the institution itself work better, not just for the institution's sake, but for the broader hemisphere. But also being nimble and flexible enough to address some immediate challenges and even forthcoming challenges that we will face here in the hemisphere. What I really liked about that final priority is that it seems like you're going beyond just working and wanting to work with governments, but really addressing what the people of the hemisphere are really looking to. So I think that that's very impressive, and thank you for sharing those priorities. I want to ask you a question more about you have your priorities, but there are still changes here in Washington. There are changes that are coming around the world. How will your leadership be critical to sort of navigating those challenges so you can advance on those priorities you've just shared with us? And then as a follow-up to that is, in this current political context where we're seeing growing protectionism, whether it's here in the US or elsewhere, why is multilateralism important? Why is the OAS still important?
Yeah, those are two very important questions. And this goes to the heart of ultimately being successful if you approach it well. And I think one of the key things which I will bring to the table is a strong engagement with leaders, with countries. Ultimately, the countries, the member states of the OAS, are the owners of the organization. I'm an administrator, facilitator, guiding the process towards consensus. And I think it's important to say that in that context, working with the member states to create ownership and to align the mandates which member states will propose with the executive capacity of the OAS, then you get a real delivery on what member states recognize as being in their own interest. And what I would like to see happening, not alone, but together with all other partners, is that member states see the value of the Organization of American States. It has to mean something to them in a very concrete way. And when that happens, member states will be easier approachable in terms of supporting with finances. So when we can demonstrate that the OAS stands for something, not only theoretically, but in a practical term, in improving the life of the people, and they see the benefit on the ground, then I think that buy-in will create really ownership, and that ownership will translate into more support. Let me immediately say, I said earlier, we have a great team at the OAS in terms of the staff. Before, or at least in the past 10 years, I feel that we had a little bit of a distance between the political secretariat and the institutional secretariat. I don't work like that. I work with the institutional secretariat in the first place, because that's your backbone in terms of delivery capacity. And I must say that the OAS has done a lot of good things over the past 10 years at a technical level, but it has not been communicated. The narrative of the value of the OAS has not been communicated. So I want to be more in the countries with society, demonstrating the value of the OAS, not only with the permanent representatives, not only with the presidents and prime ministers, not only with the foreign ministers. It has to become part and parcel of our societies. If we can demonstrate that, because we have done so already in terms of election, in terms of security, in terms of education, there are many areas where OAS has delivered already. We're going to tell the story now. That is what will create my first entrance into recognizing the value. On a more longer term, the issue about multilateralism and the nationalistic tendency in the world, regretfully, this is not something uniquely for the Western Hemisphere. It is a global issue. And to be honest, I'm not sure if COVID-19 has created that dynamic the way we handled COVID-19. As you know, when COVID-19 hit our countries, international solidarity was weak. It was suddenly all about ourselves and not so much about others. It took a couple of months to get back into the reality of global security and global solidarity, because we understood that solving a problem of COVID-19 in one country was still not the end game, because you're still jeopardized by your surrounding environment. But it has created some level of nationalistic approach. And we have to battle that, because most of our problems in the world, but certainly in this hemisphere, I would think even more than half our challenges which we face with development, with political stability, with all kinds of detailed processes in societies, is cross-border in nature. And that means when something is cross-border in nature, it means you have to collaborate. Whether you're willing to do that, it doesn't matter. You will not be able to solve the problem if you don't work together. That collaboration is important. I want to bring back that notion that we will not be able to solve problems, most of the problems, if we don't work together. That's multilateralism. You need the OAS for that. We need all the countries in the hemisphere sitting at one table, even if we disagree. Even if we disagree, we must sit together, listen to each other, and find ways going forward. It doesn't need to be solving all problems. We have to be realistic. But there are issues which we can solve by looking to the underlying causes of those problems. Migration is one of those. And also looking at the fact that we will not be able to solve all problems on our own, within our own territory, because the problem is not only there. So if we can bring this notion back that multilateralism has a function, serves the interest of countries, I think countries will be willing to say, let's work together. And that is ultimately the first step towards sustainable, durable development going forward.
Thank you, Minister Ramdin. Three things I take away from there. One is I love that point that our challenges are cross-border in nature, therefore necessitating cross-border solutions. And that being the foundation of multilateralism. That goes back to your point earlier about being an honest broker, being that facilitator,
Yes.
administrator for the OAS. Two other things that really resonate. One is telling the story. The OAS is here in Washington. It services most of the hemisphere. Telling that story to the average day person on its utility, I completely agree with you, is critical. And then finally, I like this idea of promoting the value of the OAS in a concrete way, taking it away from this, I guess, this high level understanding of what is multilateralism, but how does it work for you on a daily basis? And so with that, want to kind of wrap up with this final question, which is, it seems, CARICOM countries are often the countries that are relegated to the outskirts of foreign policy attention, not just for sometimes the United States or even Canada, but even Latin American partners as well. And you having spent time at the OAS working not just with the Caribbean, but Latin American as countries as well, how will you ensure, on one hand, Caribbean voices are at the table, given that we're at the forefront of many of the challenges, whether it's climate change, rising crime and violence, etc., but can also work together closely with their Latin American counterparts?
That's critically important. We have a diverse community. The notion that we have a homogeneous set of countries, that's absolutely false. We have a very diverse hemisphere by region, by country. Every region, every country has their own needs and challenges and goals and priorities. We have to recognize that. You have to know that. Of course, you can bring them together. The Caribbean has a development issue. Central America has a security issue. South America has more democracy, stability, political stability issues. That's in a very high level fashion. The northern part is much more interested in how can we use such an organization to continue with the political stability. You have to recognize that first. You have to be aware of that. Secondly, the OAS exists, I think it's now 76 years. And out of that 76 years, 45 years with membership of a different cultural background, historic background of countries of the Caribbean, the Anglophone Caribbean, and Suriname and Haiti included. Now, that is an addition to the diversity the OAS already represented. But these countries in the Caribbean bring a lot of experience, a lot of positive achievements, which go straight to the goal of the OAS: peace, prosperity, democracy, human rights, engagement with societies. Those are what I call critical assets, which are useful. So there is a meaningful role to be played by CARICOM countries in terms of all these concepts. And I'll give you the example. When I believe it was 2011, we had a General Assembly of the OAS in Costa Rica to adopt the Inter-American Democratic Charter. And if there is one region that can speak to democracy, living democracy and parliamentary system and electoral system, then it's the Caribbean. It was the Caribbean at that meeting that said, no, this document is not strong enough, is not there as yet. Let's take 3 months more to make it much better. And they got it done. They did not approve the draft, and we went then to Peru on that unfortunate day of 9/11 to adopt a much more effective, much more improved Inter-American Democratic Charter. So it's not that we just are a member, we contribute to the OAS in many ways. And so this demonstrates what CARICOM can mean in the OAS. It helps everybody. This time around, we have the opportunity to assume leadership and exercise that leadership. After 45 years of membership, we have never occupied the highest position. That's an ambition and an aspiration of CARICOM countries. It's a united front, And not just because we want to occupy the position, but we are the best positioned in the current time we live in. We are one of the best organized sub-regional systems in the hemisphere currently. South America trying to get back to a regional system. Central America has great difficulty being a united Central American system. North America has its own challenges. So we cannot have a Secretary General that, because there are problems in his own region, needs to focus on those issues. You need the Secretary General who is free from that burden, and the CARICOM provides that freedom. So we hope that CARICOM has that opportunity to lead. It will be good for the whole hemisphere. But there are particular issues in CARICOM that need to be addressed. And as I said before, the OAS is not a development fund as such or a development agency. But the issues we are dealing with, like climate crisis, economic resilience, like institutional capacity, like debt burden, and all of that, those need to be discussed in the political discourse at the OAS. It must be part of it because it goes to the heart of development. Development, democracy, human rights are critical values of the OAS. So we cannot spend time on democracy and human rights alone. It cannot be. It must include development, because through development, you'll be able to guard and safeguard democratic values and security and civil society engagement and human rights. So this is how I see it, that the role of CARICOM and the agenda of CARICOM must be part and parcel of the OAS overall discourse on development, stability, peace in the hemisphere. So this is where we're going for. There's a wide spread support for this approach. So we will see what happens on Monday coming, but I feel very confident that CARICOM will be recognized for its role it can play.
Thank you, Minister Ramdin. I like that earlier part where you said the Caribbean has those critical assets, those attributes that can contribute to bringing diverse opinions and the diverse nature of the region itself into the OAS, right? Because there will always be diverging opinions that need to come to some form of consensus. And it goes back to your point about being an honest broker and being able to do that. And I think one thing that's critical is that Caribbean leaders have often been a voice for the voiceless. And it seems very much so that you're bringing that sort of enthusiasm and that leadership to this current candidacy. And I want to very much quickly thank you for taking time out of your day, especially with the vote looming, not too far from now, to spend time with us and to share some of your thoughts and your priorities going forward. And would love to continue this conversation. No matter the outcome. You can always count on the Atlantic Council and our Caribbean Initiative being a friend to you, Suriname, and the wider Caribbean hemisphere as well. So once again, want to thank you for your opportunity, and good luck this coming Monday.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity.